This is Kathleen Elliott. In week 7, we're focusing on what is similar about different Indigenous populations to make healthcare communication effective. We want people to know we understand them and to not offend them. We want people to respond positively to our message. The pictures I'm using in this presentation all have similarities and differences, just like people do. They're all mine, so I don't have to worry about copyright. They were all taken in Montana. And while we're concentrating on similarities, we also acknowledge that they're all unique. To truly understand the similarities of Indigenous people, we need to revisit history. A big similarity Indigenous people have is a history of being forced to constantly endure changes to and in their environment. Most groups no longer fully live how or where they traditionally lived. Outsiders have imposed unnatural land boundaries. In the U.S., many of the reservations that were created even clustered tribes together that traditionally never liked each other and still don't. The environments also change when toxins, pollutants, and contagions are introduced. These interferences have Indigenous people struggling to maintain a modicum of their original lifestyles. Indigenous populations are historically neglected in ways that could be helpful and imposed on in ways that are detrimental. They have lower access to education and social services, and the loss of traditional lands and resources with economic deficits that go along with that. Our readings this week remind us it was and is outside influence that threatened these groups in the first place. So how do we change this? There were two main themes in our readings. One is, why not ask the people how we can help them? Firstly, we need to understand how best they receive messages, and we can get this information from the community itself. The most important and first step is to involve the community. Once we understand who the people are and how they communicate, then we're able to alert the community to threats and help them avoid or mitigate them. People within and outside of the community can bring in expertise and help shift that historical paradigm. 5 factors facilitating effective communication include understanding and honoring Indigenous knowledge, involving community members in the message design process, including different generations, using appropriate language, and finding ways to engender trust in health communicators. Indigenous populations are recognized as more vulnerable to the environment health risks due to their intimate relationship with and reliance upon the environment. The readings describe several instances of environmental threats and how poor communication made situations worse or created entirely new threats. There were several examples, but one was when authorities alerted Indigenous people to the threat of the methylmercury found in commonly consumed fish. The warning messages were really intended to target pregnant women and children. Because of how the information was disseminated, however, everyone ceased or significantly reduced local fish consumption. The consequences of poor communication can result in economic hardship, stress and anxiety, worsening health, including diet-related health consequences, mistrust and avoidance, and losses in language, culture, and social connections, such as those associated with traditional activities like fishing, hunting, and harvesting. One of the readings concentrated on the difficulty in effective communication surrounding cancer. Indigenous people die from cancer more often than non-Indigenous people. When they do participate in cancer screenings, cancer is often found at an advanced stage, very difficult to treat. We know that education increases positive health outcomes. There are fundamental differences in how Indigenous people understand and communicate about their bodies, health, and illness. We need to understand what those similarities and differences are if we're going to be successful in educating Indigenous people appropriately. Many people have difficulty with a healthcare provider's tendency to talk over them, sometimes unconsciously using medical jargon that's not understood. The fast pace of most primary care visits is never ideal, but taking the time to sit, listen, and speak are critical in working with Indigenous populations. Somehow we have to figure out a way to slow down and listen, allow for time to talk, and develop that trust. To communicate effectively with Indigenous populations, you do need to consider who will be the spokesperson disseminating the information, which is why you have to start with involving and understanding the community first. The spokesperson must be perceived to be credible and trustworthy. Some Indigenous populations do not trust messages from government, scientists, or popular media. Some prefer to receive information only from elders or family members, and some do prefer healthcare providers. Resource scarcity is a real thing, not just lack of internet, but lack of providers, food, supplies, and transportation. When I worked in Montana, I picked up hitchhikers all the time getting to and from town, many times for healthcare appointments. Considering the isolation and extremes in weather, I hope that the goodwill would translate into someone doing the same for me if I was stuck out there. This speaks to the interdependence that exists. The weather extremes are no joke. Lacking appropriate resources, we had to fly out critical patients all the time, such as car crash victims, but planes and helicopters can't fly in bad weather. The closest Walmart to where I lived was almost 80 miles away in Canada. Because of the lack of internet and cell phone service, flyers and word of mouth, which means on the street, in the community, or face-to-face in that healthcare office, are often a very effective way to communicate healthcare information. The clinic often coordinated with the school and community center to disseminate information. Facebook posts can also be effective. I had heard that my clinic always wanted to do a community health fair. I first asked if anyone minded if I put something together. I called the main hospital and other community resources and asked them if they would come and bring whatever they thought would be helpful. I even asked for advice on where the event should be held. I just facilitated. I told whoever I was inviting, I don't know if 3 people will be here or 300, but please come. The event ended up being well attended and actually a lot of fun. The most important concept for me was that this wasn't my event, it was theirs. Trust is fundamental to success and is created and maintained by involving Indigenous populations and community members in communication development. Not everyone will have the opportunity to work specifically with Indigenous populations. However, everyone works and lives within a community. The concept of understanding your community before launching a campaign is still relevant. It's like the pictures. There are things that make them the same, but there are things that make them different. The more you learn and are involved, the more your experience is enriched and the more effective you'll be. My questions for you are, what is the general culture of the people you live and work with right now? What do they have in common? What is uniquely different about them? What's one of their biggest health threats? And what messaging would you use to help them understand and mitigate this threat? Looks like a lot of questions, but it's really not. The idea is just to think about the people you live and work around, because everyone lives and works in a community and culture that has unique characteristics and makes them the same and different. I look forward to hearing your experiences, and thank you for listening.